Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in work and life and simplify them. And friends, today's topic is all about us, the body, specifically the physical, but it might also move into the emotional and spiritual as well. What I want to talk about today leans more on the self-care side, even though that's a bit of a buzzword, let's be real. But I want to talk about how to truly listen to our bodies. It's been a crazy last year and a half for nearly every single person on the planet, and this is where I think we may need to begin. So my special guest today, her name is Irene Lyon. She teaches people all around the world how to work with the nervous system to transform trauma, heal body and mind, and live full creative lives. Now, to date, her online programs have reached over 4,000 people in 90 different countries around the world. She's got a master's degree in biomedical and health science, and she also has a knack for making complex info super easy for all of us to understand and apply to our lives. So, I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Irene Lyon. Hey, Irene.
Hi. Hey, Mary. Hello, hello.
How many times have we all sat at a desk because we're trying to hit a deadline and we're like, oh, I got to pee, but oh, you know what? I'm just going to keep plowing through. We've all done it, right? Mm-hmm. I'm curious if when you do listen to your body and you do go to the toilet when you need to, right at that moment, and you do it with consistency, are you also sending cues back to your body that, hey, I can trust you.
Yes.
I can trust that you are listening to me and giving me what I need and all the things as well, right?
100%.
Yeah.
It seems almost so simple that it's impossible.
Right.
But I love my animal analogies. If you think about if you've ever raised a litter of kittens or puppies, they're just going when they have to go.
Yeah.
It can get messy. And same with like cows out on a dairy farm. Like they're not looking to see if anyone's listening to their movements. It's just coming out right now. I'm not saying, here's the thing. If we don't have a toilet, we don't just pull our pants down in the middle of Times Square and go. Now, we would consider that mentally unwell.
Right.
So there's also, because of the way our society is, we have developed this ability to hold in. But if you're out in the woods, in the forest, hunter-gatherer style, you aren't waiting. You're doing these natural things when it occurs. Yeah. So you have to also have discernment. Like you don't want to be a crazy person that's just doing that in the middle of Times Square. Sure. But you also have to learn that is a very important cue. Hunger is another one. There's a whole industry around food and eating disorders. And again, it sounds simple, but because of the way children are often bribed, forced, they're not listened to. The classic example I've been loving is the kid that comes to mom before dinner's ready and is like, Mom, I'm hungry. Can I have a snack? No, you've got to wait. Yeah. As simple as that might sound, at that young age, they are feeling their body. And if you haven't started this game of, cat and mouse with food, and it's just the kid is hungry, you let them eat. Just like an infant who needs to breastfeed, I would hope a mother isn't going to deny their child food when they want it. Right. And when they're done, they're done. You're not going to keep forcing them to eat all their vegetables that they can get dessert or they can get the prize. And so again, I look at cultures where my mom grew up in the Philippines, none of that happens. There's none of that stuff there. It's just food's on the table, you eat it. You're grateful for it, you bless it, you eat it. When you're full, you get up. You don't even excuse yourself. Yeah. And then the next person comes and they eat. So starting to listen to those hunger cues, eat when we're hungry, stop when we're full, even thirst. Most people are dehydrated, and so being able to listen to that. And I've already kind of mentioned it, but passing gas, burping, passing gas up the other end, flatulence, we shame people often for it. We have to pardon ourselves. We have to excuse ourselves. And again, it's just a natural occurrence. So yes, there's decorum and societal decencies, but we've also stripped ourselves away from feeling okay with these natural responses. So many people just want to heal their trauma, like you said, in 45 minutes.
Yeah.
I have found, Mary, that if someone isn't comfortable with these basic processes, it will be very hard for them to heal stored trauma, because stored trauma comes out in so many ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
It isn't just a shaking, it's not just crying. It could be something really weird that seems almost too strange that a person will actually shut it down
Yeah.
because they're not trusting the organic process. I hope that makes sense.
It totally does. And the things that have been healthy habits that I've integrated into my life, and it's funny to say this because, here I am still human and having a tough week myself this week. But
Oh,
the
yeah.
things that work for me is making sure that my pantry is stocked with good, healthy whole foods. So
Yeah.
things like raw almonds, no flavoring, no seasoning, no salt, none of that. Sugar snap peas that are raw in my refrigerator. There should be access to water at all times. Even for me, when I don't want to drink water, I spritz a little lemon juice in there that helps for some
Mhm.
reason to help me want to drink it more. And it's those things that when you reach for those healthy whole foods, at least for me, rather than some chemical or processed chips,
Mhm.
candy, chocolate, whatever. I know for a fact when I reach for the chemically processed stuff, I feel horrible. It's like the cycle keeps going further and further down. I might get the sugar buzz right at that moment, but ultimately an hour later, I'm crashing and all
Mhm.
the things. So, and I also know that for me, practically speaking, the things that work and help me kind of get back to center is taking a 10-minute walk around the block with my dog, and just getting out in the sunshine, or taking my shoes off and sinking my feet down in the grass and
Mhm.
doing a bit of grounding that way. And I say all those things, and have I done that today? No.
Haha, yes. Well, and it's an interesting thing because we always say we're human,
Yeah.
and that couldn't be more true, because our brain is so powerful and so important, and yet it can also deke us out,
Yeah.
and it'll prevent us from doing what the biology needs. And so when we really start to listen to that biology or physiology, as it would be in the human system, and it's like we're really trying to trust it.
Yeah.
And something in our culture, in our human species, is so it gets hijacked by the conditioning, by the I'll just do one more thing, or I know I have to do this but I don't. And a lot of the self-care practices that people know they should do but they don't, from my experience at least in working with people, it's usually a sign that there's something internal that's being missed.
Yeah.
And what that is, I don't know, because everyone's different. But what occurred with food when we were young? What occurred with activity when we were young? Were there punishments? Were there rewards? There is so much, at least again in Western society, conditions and again, punishment, achievement, rewards around these basic human needs.
Yeah.
And it is so messed up because, again, you go back to animals, they have no trouble wanting to go for a walk.
Yeah.
They stop eating when they're full,
Yeah.
typically,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
They just go with their body.
And I was a kid of the 80s. I mean, when I scored a goal at soccer, I got treated with ice cream
Yes.
afterwards every time.
Mm.
I was, a kid that, my parents were very strict, and we eat our meal. And if we don't leave a bit on it, you have to finish it all. And it's
Yeah.
interesting now that I am a parent myself, and I like to believe a little bit more awake and have maybe a broader understanding of some of these things that are at play, I really try to stop the cycle here,
Great.
so I don't pass this along to my children, or at least I try not to, that the weird rules and rewards and shame that's surrounding food in general is horrible. And
it's atrocious. No,
yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. And so for me, I try to not let it pass down to this next generation, so that the relationship with food is completely different. Because I think for me, some of the things that are working underneath the Wizard of Oz curtain is a story of not enough. It's not enough. So the work that I put out into the world, it has to be more.
Right.
The food that we put on the table, well, it's not enough. So you got to really make sure that you get your fill and you're fully fed, and it's that perpetuating cycle. So I want to change gears here a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I know that your work talks a lot about becoming your own medicine and also really shedding a light and focus on anger itself, anger and rage. Like so many of us have been taught that anger is a bad emotion, quote unquote. Like how do we make space for anger and actually process it in a healthy way?
Yeah. That is a very important one. And even, to this day, I hear lots of shows still saying that anger is a negative emotion. There's the negative emotions and the positive emotions. But emotions are just, I often say they're neutral.
Yeah.
In that, as again, mammals, as humans, we have a spectrum of about 6 main emotions. There's some, nuance within them. And anger is one of them, just like fear is one, and sadness and happiness and joy and disgust and surprise. Those are the main ones. And I don't know where along the spectrum of humanity healthy aggression and expressing life force energy completely got shut down. But it starts really young, Mary, and it starts when the baby starts to pull on maybe the hair of mom or scratch or hit or bite. And that is just their physiology getting the next level of life force energy and strength, right? Like it's not happening at 2 weeks, right? And everyone's a little bit different, but what occurs when that infant is matched with a parent that is disgusted by that behavior, that sees that little one as a little monster, and then they might be, and I've heard that some of the common suggestions, and this is not what a person should do, by the way, but is to flick and pinch their skin so that they get a shock. One friend looked up because her little infant was starting to scratch and hit, and she looked up on the internet what to do when your infant hits you, and the first hit she got on Google was hit your kid back.
Ugh.
And I'm like, where is this coming from?
Yeah.
And so, and she asked me, she's like, that's not right, right? I'm like, of course. And she knew, but she was like, what is going on here? Yeah. And so I said to her, and I say to my people, like, that initial life force energy needs to be matched. So when that little hit or that scratch comes up, as the caregiver, play with them. Hold their little hands and give them a little resistance. Have them pull a little bit back and say with exclamation, wow, you are so strong. Look at those little paws of yours. Look at those little hands of yours. And what will happen is they will engage with that social engagement, and they will see that their healthy force is accepted.
Right.
But if you think about it, and this is why the theory is so important, because we've gotten so far away from that natural thing, right? If again, you think about kittens and puppies, like when they're playing, they're like gnawing at each other and they're doing this thing. To know that that is important and it's healthy, and to foster it means that that little one then can express their exuberance and jubilation when it's there. And usually if that caregiver knows that theory and can play with it when they get a little older and they want to take a stick and smash the ground, it's like, whoo, you were strong there,
Yeah.
and they usually will be like, yeah, of course you want them to not hit their siblings and get into trouble. And then this is where the finesse of teaching a child right from wrong then starts to come in. So I think because there's been so much confusion around the human animal that is also a human with the higher brain,
Right.
there's been a lot of, well, we don't want to be little monsters, so we're just going to slap that out of you and say that's bad. But we are a human animal. We're a mammal. So we have to express these things in the context of our, civilization, if you want to call it that. And so what often occurs in the older, and I say older, I mean adult people we work with, is there will be a few things. One will be anger is bad. I don't want to have anything to do with it because I was beat. I saw parents shouting at each other. I saw violence in the household.
Right.
It's terrible. I don't want anything to do with it. But then what's happening is that person is denying their life force energy and their humanity. And then we know through research, specifically of the work that Gabor Mate has done, he's a very prominent author and physician, that when we suppress anger, we suppress so much and we get sick. The other flip side is a person who is has a very easy fuse that lights off, right? So it's like the anger is bubbling and it's violent. So anger is not violence.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where there's a distinction. Anger is healthy aggression energy, it's life force energy, and it is in the purpose of helping a person push forward. And the word anger, or aggression, I should say, comes from Latin, which is aggredi, which means by definition to push forward, to be in life force energy, to have movement, to get things done, right? It kind of plays into an interesting part about what we talked about at the beginning around pushing too far.
Yeah.
So,
but let me pause you right there, though, because
please.
I feel like it sounds like to me, anger is a natural emotion, as you say, a neutral one that needs to get expressed. It needs to come up and out of you, not bubbled in and then explode like a volcano, right? Mm-hmm. But then there's the push and pull of creating a safe container, if you will, so that when you release it, it's not harming other people and not harming yourself physically, self-harm and things like that. So in a practical way, what are some micro or macro ways we can create that safe space, that container to express our anger?
It's very dependent on a person's environment. And this is where, when we are in relationships that are toxic, it's hard.
Yeah.
Because we may decide, oh my goodness, this is making so much sense. I want to start expressing my frustrations, my because frustration, irritation, little mini temper tantrums, that is on the continuum of this healthy aggression, anger. If I am living with a partner, for example, whom is not even abusive necessarily physically, but can't contain their own emotions and is easily tripped off with like the tiniest little crack on the floor, that other partner, so let's just say myself, we are going to hold back. We're not going to feel it's safety. Right. We won't feel safe. And so this is where we are in a bit of a pickle, because if someone wants to work at this level, they're going to have to be very attuned to, will it be safe?
Right.
If I'm, let's just say, working and all of a sudden something really angers me around a work thing, and I feel this desire, and I'm not going to do it because it'll be really loud, but to stomp or just to hit my hands on this desk, or really stomp my feet, or growl or scream. If the person in the kitchen, or downstairs doesn't accept this need for their partner to express,
release,
they might get in trouble. They might get yelled at. Or if that happens, the person will be like, well, I can't do that again. That wasn't safe.
Right.
Which is sort of what happens when we're kids. if we show an anger response and we're sent to our room or we're hit, right? Like that kind of thing. So little things. So let's just say, second scenario, it is safe. The people in your world are accepting of you expressing this. This is where coming back, believe it or not, to listening to that internal physiology is important, because true life force energy, it bubbles up from the root. If we talk chakras, the core, the perineum, the viscera, the sexual organs, and it rises up. A lion doesn't roar from their throat. They roar from the full viscera, and it's big, right? And so part of getting some of these things out is first knowing and acknowledging this is healthy. This is important. I am an animal, mammal. I'm a human, yes, but I need to express these frustrations. Boundaries, believe it or not, are on that spectrum. Saying no, like that's a health, like we talk about boundaries and all this, but it arises from that fight flight.
Right, right.
Like don't you dare touch my baby cubs. No, right? And so again, though, if we have a partner or a workmate or whatever, and they're uncomfortable with their own life force energy, and we put that boundary, they're going to think that we're attacking them when really we're just taking care of ourselves.
Yeah. It's interesting that you should say all this. I'll be a little vulnerable and admit something. So 2 weeks ago, I was just in a place of super stress, like just sadness, stress, and grief. And I really did drop down into my body and just to say, okay, like, what do I need right now? And luckily, the kids were away at some activity. I had the whole house to myself. And when I tapped into my intuition and listened, I realized I needed to get down, like physically laid down on the floor and like just cried and in a very deep guttural, almost a howl, if you will, which sounds very overdramatic, maybe to some people, but for me, just giving myself that space, knowing that I live in a house that's not sharing walls with other people. It was a space where no one's going to call the cops because they're thinking I'm freaking out. Like the kids weren't there to witness it. My poor dog was a little bit confused, but that 15, 20 minutes, however long it took to do that. And of course I felt sad and very raw afterwards, but it did feel like a true release.
Nourishing.
Yeah.
No. And what you just go ahead.
And the part of the kind of the visceral growl or howl that came from it as well was also very healing for me, because I think so many times, especially as women, we are taught to just be small.
Be small and not be human. And I think that's what you just said, and this is what's so hard to convey, because there are moments when I might be releasing something and I say to my husband, God, I wish we had like a candid camera in our house all the time so that when those natural things come out, like it could be recorded, because it's fake to start filming it after it's occurred. But we have not, as a human species, at least in the Western world, come to realize how extravagant and insanely expressive we can be when we let out what is really in there. Yeah. A lot of the times, there's this thought that, to release trauma, you just have to shake. And that's so not true. Sometimes there might be a shaking response, but because of our emotionality, because of our animal nature, because of our higher brain, the way that we express is like, I don't even have a word for it, because it has that element of animal howls, whimpering, but also the human complexity. It could come out in babble. It could come out in stomping and hitting the fists, but it could also come out in crazy creativity. I mean, months ago, I don't know what was going on in my body, but I had this crazy desire to like sing a song. and stomped so hard. And it went something like, I'm marching down the road and I'm going to keep I don't know what was going on. And my husband came up and he's like, go, Irene, go. But it felt very childlike, but it also felt like a healthy aggression. And I don't know what the heck was moving out, but I went with it. And a lot of the times when I was in private practice, I'm not anymore, but when I was, I knew that we were on to a really good path of release when the client would look at me and be like, this is going to sound really weird, but, and I'm like, yes, because what that means is they're sensing something that is totally unscripted and it's weird. And they are like, whoa, what is this? And I say, well, feel it, do it. What is it? Don't question it. But again, if we were that kid that was told, this is how you do your homework, this is how you ride your bike, this is how you clean your room, and there was none of that expression, we have been conditioned to not trust that internal creative impulse. So the anger piece is not just about growling or hitting. It can come out in crazy, silly ways, but it also might come out, let's just say we were abused. Physically, sexually, we were attacked, which happens. We would say, and this is more advanced, so don't just try this off the bat when I say it to those listening, but we would call it annihilation work, where you are actually viscerally not doing this. Like you don't go to someone's door and knock down and say, you hurt me, I want to do this, but it's you are feeling in your physiology, you are feeling in, we call it the procedural memory of I wanted to strangle that person. I wanted to blow them up. I wanted to hurt them, but I couldn't because I froze because I was too little. But in that animal physiology, we call this procedural memory. There is a stored procedure in that animal world, in our physiology, that wants to execute that movement to protect. And it might be to fight, it might be to annihilate, to kill, or it might be to run the heck away. Right? And this is why that education is so important, because someone might think that there's something mentally wrong with them if all they're visualizing is annihilating their abuser. Because we've been taught forgive, heal, love, and yes, that's true. But if there is an animal instinct that wants to murder someone, and I'm being really honest here, we have to work with that energy. But we know from society, because of all the violence that occurs and all these things that are happening all the time, no, not just this year, all the time, this stuff happens. That is happening because usually that individual has not learned how to deal with the stored survival impulses. And all you have to do is look at people's histories. They came from home lives that weren't good or home lives that didn't allow their emotional expression. These sorts of things where there's just been no empathy baked into them. But under that no empathy is a raging tiger that wants to just massacre. I'm going a little deep here, but that's, we wonder, how could that person do that? It's like, well, I can tell you how. There is stored survival energy that is so bubbling. You don't know how to contain it. They're certainly not learning this information that we're talking about. And all the system wants to do is get it out because it's so intense to keep it in.
Right. And it explodes if it doesn't get released, trickle over time, right?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why, just finish this thought. I mean, people often don't understand why parents could hurt their own children. And it happens all the time. It's like, well, if they haven't done the work and if they were hurt when they were young and they couldn't get that out, maybe they've done a ton of talk therapy and maybe they've done a lot of journaling and trying to meditate. But if they're not working with that physiology, that can go off. And then you add another child and it triggers that early stuff that happened to them.
Right.
right? This is why this stuff occurs.
Right. And it perpetuates the cycle, generation
Yes.
to generation, generation.
Yeah.
As you were speaking there, it sparked a memory. One of the things that I totally miss, having moved from Nottingham, England, back
Yeah.
to Texas, and I have not found it here yet, is there's a dance company called Dance 4. I'll put the link in the show notes if people are
Yeah.
curious. But they used to run intuitive dance and movement classes. There was an instructor named Katie. She was brilliant. And it wasn't about learning dance routines or movements or things, but it was just creating that container, that safe space for us to move our bodies in whatever way we wanted to. The music was lyrical. The music sometimes was manic and very intense. But it was this true therapy space for us to explore and to talk if we wanted to talk about it, but just to simply physically release it. That I am so desperate to find something like that again. And I know it exists where I live in Texas. I'm sure I just have to seek it out. But those kinds of modalities are out there.
Yeah.
People that are tuned into this stuff, right?
Totally. That sounds like Gabrielle Roth's 5 rhythms work.
Yeah.
It's lyrical, staccato, flow. I've done some of that work, and yeah, you get into these different states of movement. The key with those movement practices is that you want to ensure that that biology is being felt, because a person can also bypass those emotions because it's like it's safe to always be in lyrical, for example. And then the person in the corner is going off in staccato, stopping their feet. And so that the container in those classes is super important.
Yes.
That everyone understands. Don't follow the leader. Don't follow the person who looks the most beautiful in their movement.
Exactly.
Do you?
Yeah.
The haka, have you ever seen, did you see that viral video that went, the wedding ceremony?
Yes.
I mean, that is a really good therapeutic tool to watch, because the emotion, the expression, that is all, not all, but there is a healthy life force aggression in there, but there's also connection. They're doing it together. The women and the men are communicating. And when I watch that video, even though I've watched it dozens of times, I still get shivers through my spine.
Yeah.
Right? And that life force energy is so critical for humans. And we tend to forget, or we do it just on that weekend retreat. I'm going to go to that retreat and get my stuff out. And that's great, but we need to find a way to have it in our day-to-day, mundane lives. And from experience, when we can, things just build up in a really good way.
Yeah, to normalize expressing emotions and feelings in a healthy way. Again, the container is not harming yourself or harming others, but to get it up and out of you in little ways. Because I liken it to a pressure cooker sometimes. When I feel like I'm anxiety up here, it's like the pressure cooker has been stuck for so long that it needs the release or it'll explode. I think what I'm hearing and what you're saying is just that little trickle, the little release over time so that you do not explode, right?
100%. 100%. Some of the exercises we do with our students revolve around sound. Very deep visceral sounds that actually help to stimulate that vagus nerve and the viscera and the throat in a very neutral way. It's not prayer, it's not ohms from yoga. It's just these really deep guttural visceral sounds that mimic in a way those animal cries. And you're right, what you just said too a second ago about safety, containment. You don't want to harm others. You don't want to harm yourself. You don't want to harm your stuff, right? What you said about how you broke down when the kids were out is really important. Because what I've seen, so you're doing a good job with that, because a lot of times there's this misunderstanding that for my children to be emotionally well and regulated, they have to see mom emitting their emotions. And that's not 100% accurate, because when a child is still immature and learning, we as the big people have to actually be really solid and regulated.
Yeah.
And I've seen this swing where, and again, this is no one's fault other than the fact that we're still learning, but parents allowing themselves to break down, allowing themselves to be a mess in front of their kids. And what's happening, and I'm seeing it sadly too much, is the child feels unsafe.
Yeah.
And then they start to change themselves, or they start to parent the parent. And I see it on social media and it drives me crazy. And people are like, oh, I'm so glad that so-and-so is like bringing me a cup of tea. Like they're learning. And I'm like, no. That's actually showing that child that they have to take care of you and that you're a mess.
Right.
It's okay to be a mess. Be a mess when it's safe and they're not watching it. Now, it's different from, say, the cat dies and you're a little sad and you have some tears. Mommy, why are you crying? I'm so sad. Mm-hmm. That's different than what you described. You did a couple. You would not want an infant or a child or even a teenager to see that unless they understand the context.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Totally. And I hear that, especially in my daughter who's 12, her natural reaction is to be a peacemaker, is to try to fix or all the things. And I see her and I catch her on it and I'm like, hey, no, you don't need to, it's okay. Mommy can be sad in times, and that's okay,
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think that things where they start to feel unsafe should be processed in a container outside of them. Because we're laying down the deep-rooted anchors and stories now, whether we know it or not, for them, and they are laying them down. And so, yeah, I think there's a delicate balance there. It's not about having sort of a shiny veneer on things and being like, everything's perfect, it's fine, and you're crumbling on the inside. But I think there's balance, right?
They need to see conflict and resolution. And often in the olden days, if mom and dad had a fight, they would go into another room and fight. And then the child wouldn't see the resolving. Of course, we don't want it to be violent, but conflict is something that I struggle with that myself. I didn't see that happen in my household to the degree where there was resolution. And we need to show those healthy communications that might get heated, but then we also have to see it come down the other side.
Yeah.
Right? And that is what will model to that little person not just regulation, but, this is how human interaction happens. I don't have to just walk out of the room whenever there's something difficult occurring, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's an interesting experiment, us humans, we're figuring it out.
Learning as we go. And I think I've heard other people say, your parents were, doing the best they can with the information they had.
True.
Their parents were doing the best they can with the information they had. But I think, people that are listening to us right now, and then even me listening to you, we're just being open and expansive to say, hey, we learned this thing when we were 7, but that may not be serving us anymore now. And so being
100%.
open to new information. And so if you are intrigued and curious about the work that Irene does in the world, I highly recommend going to her website. It's irenelyon.com. Specifically, she's got many courses that run throughout the year, but there is one in particular I want to tell you about. She's got an ongoing online course called the 21-Day Nervous System Tune-Up. Now, it can be started at any time today. So if you are curious about that, you can go to our website, 21daytuneup.com, or find all of the links, including that one, in our show notes over at the simplifierspodcast.com, just to take this next step into really the practical side of putting this into play. So, Irene, I have a few questions I'd like to ask you as we wrap up that I ask every single person on the podcast. And again, thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom today.
Oh, you're welcome.
Tell us, what's one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
It's interesting you say that because I have not been reading very much because I've been in a busy time. And I'm really looking forward to, I think I read the first chapter of this book. I'm like, okay, when I'm on holiday, there's me, when I'm on holiday, I'll read this. I try to read at night and then I literally am falling asleep. So it's by I'm just reading it so I get it right. Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She actually got really famous with her book Infidel. Her story is incredible. But her current book is called Prey, not prayer, but prey as in the animal prey. And then the subtitle is Immigration, Islam, and the Erosion of Women's Rights. And it's she really tracks trends around immigration, women's rights, and what's occurring in Europe right now is a lot of abuse and a lot of attacks on women from mainly men who have sought refugee status within certain countries. I am all for people helping people and bringing people into countries, and again, I'm just into the beginning, but I've heard her speak for multiple hours in other podcasts. Joe Rogan's podcast with her is actually really good. It's long, but it's good. Yeah. There was no transition with these men that were seeking asylum and refugee status. And so what's happening is that they are in their old world, but in this new world, and they don't understand that they're not allowed to do certain things with women. Right. And so there's this just mess apparently going on. I can't verify it because I haven't been to these countries recently, but she's been tracking it and she's very worried about it. So her story, I just think she's an absolute amazing person, and that she fled. She left a marriage that was arranged. She underwent genital mutilation as a young girl. And she ended up in the Netherlands without any ability to speak Dutch, but she learned it. She learned English, and she ended up becoming a parliament member in the Netherlands. Crazily enough, however, she is a target. And so she lives with armed bodyguards because of her views on making sure women have, rights, specifically and especially in these countries that are highly based on fundamental religion. So anyway, to me, it's like, it's trauma in an interesting way, but it's also, I like to learn things that aren't in my suite to see what's going on. And she's just such a great resource for that stuff. Yeah.
What an excellent book recommendation. I've not heard of that book. We will link that in the show notes for people in case you guys are curious. I can say this for myself, and I only moved to England, which is still very much a first world country. But when you travel, when you get outside of the States or Canada or North America, you see different cultures. It really widens your perspective of really what is happening in modern day society. It's shocking.
It's so important. I mean, I as I mentioned, I grew up going to the Philippines a lot. My parents took me into China in the 80s, Japan. I've traveled through Europe solo by myself many times with friends. I've taught there. Yeah. Even going to Cuba was interesting, and witnessing and feeling communism like at its core. Like, it seemed okay, but then there was something not quite right. I always loved coming back to Vancouver. It's like, man, we're lucky here, in this province, in this city. Yeah,
it certainly gives you perspective.
It does.
So I am curious then of your network, the people that you know. Can we shine a spotlight on someone that you just feel is up to brilliant things? Who would we shine that spotlight on?
There's one, I have a new friend. Her name is Sarah Kleiner with a K. And I was on her podcast late last year. She was she still is a yogi. But she was really struggling with health problems, autoimmune, hair falling out, anxiety, and just bad stuff. Gut problems that were so bad that she couldn't even sleep with her husband because the gas was so bad. And she interviewed me. I interviewed her recently, but her story is all about going on a carnivore diet. And this has been catching my attention a little bit more. And I studied applied human nutrition in my 20s when I did my fitness training and exercise science training. And I kind of left it because it was just so complex. But I'm seeing, I follow the trends, I listen to stuff that's happening. And it was just really interesting, her story about how she was vegan, she was vegetarian, and she was so sick. And when I brought that story to my people, I mean, there was a little bit of stress around the whole carnivore thing. Not everyone likes that, but I'm like, this is a story, personal story. Like, she is glowing now. She's healed and healthy. And of course, she's still doing her work. And she found me because she knew she had to work on her trauma as well. But there is something interesting with that diet that isn't for everyone, because we're all very different in our genetic makeup. We're very similar, but we also have preferences and differences, blood types, that kind of thing. But if we think about it, animals, I always go back to the animals, right? Some animals eat carnivore, like lions, let's just say. Others eat just grass, right? Panda bears, giraffes, horses. But their stomachs are also very different, and they have teeth that are very different. And so there's this interesting, humans are also very different, but we also, most of us have teeth that are the way they are, and our stomachs are the way they are. Your stomach is probably not different than mine as to someone in China versus someone in India, Europe, etc. So that has been interesting to me. So she's been an interesting person to get to know and follow her journey. She got very stressed out when her daughter ended up becoming non-speaking autistic. And that's what led her into finding yoga, because she just was so stressed out and she needed to get into her body. And then the other things followed. So yeah, Sarah Kleiner, carnivore yogi is her handle on Instagram, and she's funk. Yeah, she's a funky gal. I think she's in Atlanta.
Yeah. Well, we'll link her up in the show notes if people
Yeah.
are curious about her story and the work that she's doing out in the world.
Yeah. Thanks for asking.
So I believe that gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what's one thing you're grateful for today?
The first thing that came to mind is my husband, actually. I can hear him. He's making music right now in our basement. He is also a trauma specialist therapist, but he is a musician and a composer by trade.
Love it.
And he has beautiful healing music, actually. So if anybody wants some amazing composed healing music, he's just his site is sethlyon.com. There, I plugged him. But yeah, he beautiful music, very much tuned to the body parts and the openings. We would say the chakras, but also the energies. And I wouldn't be able to be at the place I am now without him, because my past relationships weren't that example I gave you a little while ago, where it was okay to express and all that stuff. And so when we met about 10, 11 years ago, I was like, whoa, like, I can actually cry and you're not going to tell me to stop, And I was by no means in an abusive relationship. It was just my first husband just didn't know how to deal with that emotion. And so that has been really cool, to just be with someone who can let you really be your animal self, but also your human self and all that good stuff. So yeah, he came to mind as soon as you asked that, because I could hear him.
I love it.
Picking at his guitar downstairs.
I love it.
Yeah.
So I will link him in the show notes also. But again,
Sure.
Irene's website is Irene Lyon with a Y, .com. And I'll also link up all of your social media. So if people want to connect with you or your team, they can find you on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. So Irene, my last question for you is this, and again, thank you so much. Someone somewhere is listening to us right now, and she is feeling absolutely crispy to the core.
That's a good way of putting it.
Fried beyond belief. I can imagine her right now. What's one thing you could whisper into her ear right now in this moment, just to encourage her?
The word is deserve. So we all deserve to heal, to be healthy. Belief is important, But what I've found is that belief isn't enough. We have to go to the core of inserting back into our physiology and our wiring, our birthright, our deserving of being human, full of life force energy, healthy, vibrant, setting boundaries. You deserve it.
Yeah.
And for some people, that will raise a little emotion, that might raise a little, that's impossible, doesn't matter. Whatever raises is important information to feel into, but you do deserve it. And don't let anyone ever tell you different. And just work with that one piece and then start doing the work, and you'll be amazed at what can happen when you tune into that one.
Big love to you, Irene. Thank you so
You too.
much.
Yes.
Really appreciate it.
This has been fun. Thank you.